Team Ninja are the masters of third-person melee action combat. In my opinion, nobody else even comes close. The Nioh games, Wolong, and Stranger of Paradise all have great combat, with Nioh 2 in particular being my favorite combat in any game ever. I've never played the Ninja Gaiden games, but with a new one on the way, I'll definitely be looking to give that a shot when the time comes. But yeah, I love Team Ninja the way others may love From Software, which is why when Rise of the Ronin was first announced, I was ecstatic. An open world Team Ninja game set in roughly the same time period of Rurouni Kenshin, the anime that kicked off my love for samurai in the first place? My hype was through the roof, right up until it was announced as a PS5 exclusive. But now, after an agonizing year of console exclusivity, Rise of the Ronin is finally out on PC. I have been dying to play this game ever since it was first revealed and came dangerously close to spending $500 on a console that I only wanted for one game several times throughout the year, but my patience was finally rewarded. It's finally here. So how is it? Is it everything I thought it would be? Is it everything I wanted it to be? Well, yes and no. On one hand, it is exactly what I expected in the best possible way. The combat is insanely fun and has a surprising amount of depth despite the simplifications they made. It's no Nioh 2, but it's still definitely a Team Ninja game, and I'm almost certainly going to get well over 100 hours out of it. But on the other hand, the story leaves a lot to be desired, and the itemization is overly simplified compared to their previous titles, which kind of hurts replayability. I know I just mentioned that I can get a lot of playtime out of it, but to be honest, a lot of those hours are probably going to be kinda samey, as there's just not much variation outside of the weapons. The roleplay and buildcraft leave a lot to be desired, so the combat is going to carry the replayability for me. But on the whole, I'm definitely very high on this game. It's not perfect, and I don't think most people will enjoy it as much as I do, but it's a damn good game regardless. And in this video, I'm going to try and explain why. So first things first, we should address the elephant in the room, which is performance. As some of you may know, my PC is practically a war veteran, so I am not running on anything good by today's standards. Team Ninja is also unfortunately notorious for dogshit PC ports, at least at launch, and this game is no different. If you look at the Steam reviews, it is sitting at mixed, with the majority of the complaints being about performance. So with my geriatric GPU, how was my experience? Honestly, it was mostly fine for me. I did have to tweak some settings to get it to run a bit more smoothly, but once I did, it was pretty good. I had very few technical issues or bugs, frame rate was stable, and I was able to play through the entire game with very few roadblocks. That's not to say that it was a completely smooth experience though. There were a handful of times where the game might freeze for a couple seconds, or the audio might cut in and out. The most egregious incident was this moment when it started glitching out completely. Thankfully, this was at the end of a long play session that I was ending soon anyway, so I just saved and quit for the day, and everything was back to normal the next time I played. It's just annoying things like that. They're slightly disruptive, but nothing that completely bricked my playthrough. Now, I want to reiterate that these moments were thankfully in the minority for me. As of this writing, I have about 95 hours in the game, and the vast majority of that time was played with little to no issues. That's not to say that there are no issues, just that it wasn't literally unplayable for me. From what I can tell, one of the common issues is with trying to get the game to run well with higher FPS and higher settings, but as previously mentioned, my PC is already begging for retirement, so I'm honestly just glad the game runs at all, because if I waited a year for the PC release only for this game to be unplayable, I might have actually cried. By the way, if you were wondering why I haven't streamed this game at all despite loving the shit out of it, yeah, this is why. How does it look on the stream? Does it look choppy? It's frames per hour. I'll also take this moment to briefly touch on the graphics, or rather the criticism of the game's graphics. There's been a lot of talk about this game looking like a PS3 game or whatever, and look, I'ma just be real. I don't give a shit about graphics. Like, obviously this is no Ghost of Tsushima, but to say this game looks bad is just an over-exaggeration in my opinion. Obviously, my footage isn't going to be a good gauge of how this game can look, but I don't even think that my footage looks that bad. It's fine, it's passable. But I'm also 33, so I grew up with like Nintendo 64 and PlayStation 2 graphics, and I don't think games from those eras look bad either. For me, art direction is far more important than actual graphical fidelity, and on that front, I think Rise of the Ronin is fine. It's nothing outstanding. I'd even agree to an extent that it's a bit boring, but again, I don't really think that's bad. It's just more grounded in reality than some of their other games, at least in terms of art. This is still a game where you fight a British man with rocket boots after all, but when you ignore all that, that's just a regular looking dude. He looks fine. Either way, frankly, I'll take a game with mediocre graphics and phenomenal gameplay over a game with great graphics and mediocre gameplay any day of the week. However, on a final note, a game that looks like this probably shouldn't have performance this bad. It's not like this game is insanely photorealistic and the game's open world systems aren't even that interesting, so there's no real justification for this game being this poorly optimized. I think I remember hearing about performance issues even on PS5 when it first came out, so something is definitely up under the hood. Hopefully Team Ninja can figure this shit out for their future releases, because I really don't want to have to bring this up for every new game that they release. So with performance and graphics aside, let's talk about the actual game. First up, the story. So Team Ninja isn't exactly known for their stellar storytelling. Their stories tend to just kinda be there for the sake of it. Again, never played Ninja Gaiden, so for all I know, maybe those games had some amazing writing, but as far as the games that I've played from them, let's just say you weren't playing these games for the story. Well, most of them. So in comes Rise of the Ronin, and while I'd say that this is probably the best story that they've told on purpose, it's still just okay at best. And normally I wouldn't even give this section too much attention for their other games, but Rise of the Ronin definitely tried to put more emphasis on the story than they usually do. The story is set during the Bakumatsu period, which were the final years of the Tokugawa shogunate, which had ruled Japan for about 250 years since the end of the Sengoku Jidai. This was also the time where Japan's borders were basically forced open by the US, which then led to more and more Western influence seeping into Japan, which had previously been isolated. Honestly, this is a really interesting period of time in Japan's history, and one that hasn't really been covered too much in video games, at least compared to something like the Sengoku Jidai. This game's story actually takes place over the entire time period as well, spanning the entire 14 years and basically taking you through the greatest hits of the period. Setting an RPG during this time period is a great idea, because there's so many moving parts involved here, but unfortunately, I just don't think the game quite delivers. One of the problems is that it doesn't do a great job of really immersing you in the struggles and conflicts of this period. It's not bad per se, but it just feels like you only ever get a surface level understanding of what's going on because the game keeps trying to push you onto the next major event. It felt like a whole lot of tell, don't show, basically. This is made even worse by the lackluster RPG mechanics. One of the marketing hooks that they tried to use was that you'd be able to shape your own story, implying that this is an actual RPG in which you'd get to make meaningful decisions with unique outcomes. This is bullshit. The game does allow you to make decisions, but the vast majority of them are literally just the illusion of choice, because the options either lead to very similar, if not the exact same result. Sure, you can choose to be pro-shogunate or anti-shogunate, but you never fully commit to either cause. The story tries to keep you as a free agent all the way to the end, even after you explicitly choose a side. Everyone, no matter their side, no matter their affiliation, everyone is basically your friend, no matter how many times you side against them and beat their ass. They'll simply wag their finger at you the next time they see you and proceed to still work with you and trust you. And of course, since this game tries to mostly follow actual history, even if you do fight someone in a situation where it makes little to no sense to let them live, they will survive so long as they actually survived in actual history. This makes it really hard to truly get into the story or even care about the decisions that you're making, because the vast majority of it straight up doesn't matter. The game tries to present itself as an RPG, but it just feels about as on rails as their other games. And again, I didn't really expect much out of this game's story, but I can't help but still feel a bit disappointed at the thought of what this could have been. Just a couple weeks ago, I played through Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which is another historical fiction game that tries to loosely follow history, but it still manages to allow for actual roleplay. The story is still largely on rails, but they manage to give you decisions that often impact the people you meet more so than the broad strokes of the story. Obviously, KCD2 and Ronin are two completely different games going for completely different things, but imagine if this game made you actually commit to a side. Imagine if, instead of your relationship with this massive roster of characters being exclusively positive, what if you can make some characters hate you based on your decisions? You know, like real people? I'm thinking something like the friendship and rivalry system from Dragon Age 2. Something like that could have actually worked really well here, especially if the game made you actually commit to a side rather than the constant flip-flopping. Again, I think of another game like, Fire Emblem Three Houses. Introduce us to all the major players at the start and then have us choose a side and then give us distinct playthroughs based on that decision, with meaningful decisions within those campaigns. They can still mostly stick to actual history, but there's no reason this game couldn't be an actual RPG with meaningful decisions. I actually did start a second playthrough, mostly so that I can, play with different weapons and feel the full progression and learning process again, but like, I've already abandoned that character because I'm literally doing the same thing. Even though I'm making different decisions, it's the same story. There's just not that many interesting decisions to be made or opportunities to actually role play as a character. I think the devs even know this, and so they added the Testament of Soul, which is a way for you to go and replay missions and make different decisions. So if you want to see what happens if you side with the opposite faction or whatever, then you can just do this. I don't really have an issue with this feature being here, but it really highlights how literally meaningless a lot of these choices are. I really just wish this offered a bit more of an actual RPG experience. Maybe I'm being a bit unfair, but I can't help it. Aside from that, the writing is serviceable. There are some side quests, but none of them are particularly memorable. As mentioned before, there are a ton of characters that you meet and form bonds with, but these bonds are mostly mechanical in nature. Narratively, all you get for increasing your bond with someone is a couple extra lines of dialogue and in some cases the ability to romance them, which again just amounts to a couple extra lines of dialogue and maybe a cutscene. Frankly, this game suffers the same problem as most of the other games, which is that there's so many characters that you tend to forget most of them. I suppose you'll get a bit more enjoyment out of the story if you're familiar with the actual history of this time period. I know I had a smirk on my face anytime a Rurouni Kenshin character appeared, but otherwise, while the story certainly isn't bad, it's nothing to write home about. It is simply one of the stories of all time. And look, I know I'm being a bit too critical about a Team Ninja game story, but again, I just can't help but think about how much cooler this could have been. Maybe it's because I just played KCD 2 a couple weeks ago, but I don't know, man. If you claim that we can shape our own story and then proceed to create something this railroaded, I can't help but feel a bit let down. All that said, the story is fine. I wouldn't recommend anybody buy this game just for the story, but it's enjoyable enough. It's clear they tried to put more effort into the story than their other games, so I commend that effort and I hope we can see them continue to iterate and improve on this in their future titles. So now let's talk about progression and customization. Rise of the Ronin took a very different approach to attributes here by giving you 4 skill trees filled with skills and perks to unlock. The more you unlock in a tree, the higher the corresponding attribute will get. A lot of the things in these trees are your usual passive bonuses, but there are some new skills that you can unlock in here that do add to the experience, including the best stealth kill animation I've ever seen in a game. Now, I originally thought that I had to choose what I wanted to unlock and what I was going to sacrifice, as that's usually how it goes. You focus on the things that enhance your build and your playstyle. But I realized very quickly that you're not actually sacrificing anything. The only decision you're making is what you want to get first, because you will eventually unlock everything in all 4 trees with points to spare. In fact, there's actually a 5th skill tree that unlocks after you finish the game that allows you to make your character even stronger and buff up their stats even further, as well as unlock some new combat styles for certain weapons. Aside from these skill trees, there's also the bonds that you can level with regions and NPCs. The region bonds are as simple as completing the map checklist for that area and doing some of the random events that pop up there, while the NPC bonds are increased by basically giving them gifts, dueling them at the dojo, and choosing the correct option in dialogue every now and then. Completing these bonds, whether it's the NPC bonds or region bonds, will often grant you gear, combat styles, and even some skill points, so you don't want to completely ignore these. And finally, we have gear. A common complaint in previous Team Ninja entries is how much gear these games shower you with. Personally, I've never had a problem with this because it's really not too difficult to just dismantle or sell everything below a certain rarity tier and just take a quick glance at everything else. These games usually offer numerous gear sets ranging from generic stat increases to gameplay altering bonuses that encourage you to lean into certain playstyles or skills. That isn't really present here in Rise of the Ronin. There are a handful of gear sets, but most of these kind of fall into the generic stat increase category. There's also just not that many gear sets at all, though in fairness, most of the gear sets in other games like Nioh and Wo Long tend to come in DLCs for New Game Plus. However, this game hasn't received any kind of major DLC, so we're mostly stuck with the base game gear stats. The only semi-interesting sets that were added are obtainable in Midnight difficulty, which is the game's version of a New Game Plus available at the game's original launch. However, there's only 2 of these sets, and since they can actually drop on gear with other set bonuses, it's really just a question of, do you have it or not? I should also note that there is blacksmithing in this game. You will need to upgrade your gear's level, which means you will need a lot of money and materials, which ultimately means you will be selling and dismantling a lot of trash gear in order to keep your good gear up to date. Each individual gear piece comes with randomized stat bonuses and sometimes set bonuses. You are even able to transfer a desired bonus from one piece of gear to another via the bond transfer, allowing you to somewhat fine-tune your gear. But that's about the only control you have for most pieces of gear in the game, and even then, you can't transfer something like a set bonus. All of this is to say that the build craft on offer here is probably the weakest in all of their games. The skill trees are really only there to just choose what you want to unlock first, but are otherwise very linear because you're going to end up with everything unlocked and your attributes capped at 100, unless you just don't do any side content at all. The gearing isn't much better because there's not that many interesting options and none of them really change your playstyle much, if at all. It's extremely streamlined and dumbed down from their previous games to its detriment, in my opinion. That said, it's not all bad. You are, of course, able to use whatever weapons you want. These weapons do technically scale with different stats, but since all of your stats are going to end up at 100 anyway, you can basically just use whatever combinations you want. Each weapon also has several different combat styles. I'll talk at length about the combat later in the video, but most weapons have enough combat styles that you at least get to make some small decisions on that front. Midnight difficulty also drops the highest tier of gear, which allows you to freely customize every single bonus that you get, allowing you to fine-tune something that you like, provided you have the resources and get the drops that you want. So, there is some small amount of meaningful gameplay customization that you can make, but it'll mostly be on your weapon choice and combat styles until you get to midnight difficulty. Even then, the build craft is just generally simpler than their previous entries, which can either be a good thing or a bad thing depending on your taste. I don't necessarily hate it, but I was definitely let down by what's available on the buildcraft front as their other games just offer more options. All that being said, the visual customization here is peak. These games have always had great character creators with numerous sliders and one of the better hair customizations in particular, allowing you to really fine-tune something that you like, but where this game shines over their other games is with gear appearances. Once you unlock the Longhouse a couple hours into the game, you will gain access to the refashion feature, which is basically this game's glamour or transmog system. This has to be some of the strongest visual customization in a Team Ninja game because you get to layer your gear. If you really like the coat on a gear set but don't want to wear the rest of the set, you can just use the coat and wear something else underneath. There are some pieces that are incompatible with others, of course, but for the most part, you can mix and match a huge amount to really get something that you like. The only thing I'd say this game is still missing on the visual customization front is the ability to dye your gear. I can't tell you how many times I wanted to wear 2 pieces together, and then I realized that the colors just don't mesh well and it just ruins the whole thing for me. Please, Team Ninja, if not for this game, then for your future games, please just give us the ability to dye our gear and my life is yours, please! So yeah, visual customization is great, while build customization is mediocre at best. It does hurt the replayability to an extent, as there isn't that much motivation to keep going once you roll credits on the game, but that might be a good thing depending on what you want. Personally, I would have liked a bit more since I was always going to play the hell out of this, but it's fine. Now, let's briefly touch on the open world. Team Ninja has never really been known for their level design, so I didn't really have high hopes for their take on an open world game. To be honest, this is every single checklist open world you've ever played. I'm not going to spend much time talking about it because if you've played literally any open world game that was even slightly inspired by Ubisoft, you've played this. There's, collectibles to find, enemy camps to clear, and sights to see. Gameplay wise, there's just not much I need to say here other than it's fine. I will say though, traversal of this open world is kind of nice. You have a mount that you get very early on, a glider, and a grappling hook. There are 3 separate maps, none of which are particularly large, but not small either. If you want to 100% each map like I did, you will have plenty to do. There's even a few secret bosses on each map, so, that was a nice touch. There's also some random events that you can stumble across every now and then, but it won't take you long for you to see all of them because there's really only a few of them. As you progress through the story, you'll occasionally have the opportunity to play a mission, which are instanced levels within the world. These missions are similar to Team Ninja's other games, which are entirely mission-based, but the length of these missions here in Rise of the Ronin are significantly shorter. Depending on your skill level, you can generally blast through a mission in like maybe 10 to 15 minutes, give or take. You're able to use NPC allies for these missions that you can even swap to and play if you want, or you can even play with other players in co-op. Now, being the sweat lord that I am, I never touched a co-op and never will, so I can't comment on that. I also have no interest in playing with NPCs, so once I figured out that I can just disable them and just play the mission solo, that's what I did. The allies do bring special passives and buffs to the party, as well as having their own unique fighting styles in some cases, but again, I don't really give a shit about any of this, so I can't comment on it. All I can say is it's there if you want it. And finally, with all the bullshit out of the way, we can now talk about the reason why you'd want to play this game, which is the combat. Now, I said at the start that Nioh 2 is my favorite combat in any game ever, and that is mostly because of the depth of the combat. There's so many moving parts and so many tools at your disposal between stances and key management and active skills, yokai abilities, and much more. Honestly, I could probably make an entire video on why I love Nioh 2 so much, but I digress. The point is, Nioh 2's combat has a level of depth that makes it insanely replayable, because there's always things to improve or new things to try. So when I heard that Rise of the Ronin was going to try and make things more accessible, I was immediately concerned. There's nothing wrong with the game trying to be more inviting to newcomers, obviously, but let's just say that as a Final Fantasy XIV player, I don't exactly feel great when I hear that this was a core focus. It's a fine line between streamlining unnecessary bullshit that adds nothing to the experience and completely removing the reason why the game was fun in the first place. I touched on it a bit in the progression section. Buildcraft used to be a huge part of their other games, but it's dumbed down so much in this game that it just doesn't quite hit the same way. That's why I was very relieved to find that this game still had some amount of depth and challenge to its combat. At its core, Rise of the Ronin is a parry game, so think something along the lines of Sekiro or Wo Long. You are able to dodge and some moves have evasive properties, but again, this is a parry game, which means it's partly a rhythm game. Parrying the last attack in a combo or parrying one of the unblockable red attacks will put your enemy into a panicked state, indicated by their health bar turning red. This is your window to combo them for as long as they remain panicked. The more hits in the combo that you parry, the longer they are panicked. Reducing the enemy's ki to 0 will also leave them helpless and allow you to combo the hell out of them, as well as land a critical hit, which does a ton of damage. So far, all of that is pretty standard for these types of games, but here's where Rise of the Ronin starts to carve its own path. First is the stances. Every weapon comes with a bunch of different stances that will each basically be assigned a type: Ten, Chi, Jin, or Shinobi. The Ten Chi Jin styles are good against different weapon types, in kind of a rock, paper, scissors triangle, while the Shinobi style is actually weak against everything unless you perfectly time your parries. What this basically means is, unless you're going Shinobi, you generally want to cover all the stance types so that you can swap to the correct stance to counter your opponent's weapon. Doing so will increase the length of time that the enemy is panicked when you successfully parry them with an advantageous style. It's important to note though that outside of the parry, the stances are actually irrelevant, so when going on the offense, you can swap to whatever you want and just combo to your heart's content. The next part of this is that the parry, which is called counterspark in this game, is actually on its own button. The other parry games I've played, like Sekiro and Wo Long, had their parries on a button that doubled as a defensive move anyway. Sekiro was block, Wo Long was dodge, but here, counterspark is a full commitment, and missing it will leave you wide open to getting completely bodied. The different combat styles also have slightly different counterspark timings, so you really want to familiarize yourself with your timings, because failure to do so will see you getting killed very quickly on higher difficulties. Parrying aside, every weapon comes with active abilities that you cannot change, as well as a fourth slot that lets you choose a specific move from other combat styles for the same weapon once you've mastered them. A lot of your combos will see you doing a mix of your basic combo, maybe a charge attack, and some active skills before going back to neutral. As for the stamina game, we have the Blade Flash. When this bar on your weapon fills up, you can execute a Blade Flash after an attack to regain some stamina. Successful countersparks also regain some stamina, so once you get really good at this game and memorize attack patterns, you can basically just completely destroy enemies. I wouldn't say I'm amazing at this game, and I certainly don't have all the attack patterns memorized, but man, when things go well, this game just makes you feel like a badass. Once you start getting a grip on what your opponent is doing and you get familiar with your chosen weapon and styles, it just gets so much fun and so satisfying. If you want to see the potential of cool shit that you can do with this combat, I highly recommend Last Load, who's done high-level combat videos for most of Team Ninja's games, Rise of the Ronin included. Boss design is pretty good, if a bit obnoxious at times. Visually, it's all just dude with sword and or gun, but there's a ton of variance in attack patterns here, and you will get absolutely destroyed as you try to learn these on the higher difficulties. Some of them will even swap weapons, which then incentivizes you to swap stances to counter their weapon, which can add that extra bit of spice into combat. Some bosses definitely start to feel like they cross into the obnoxious territory with how relentless their attacks can be, but once you learn their attack patterns and can parry them consistently, they all get destroyed. Overall, I don't think this game is anywhere near as replayable as some of Team Ninja's other games, but there's still more than enough here to keep it fun to come back to every now and then for quite some time. The combat on offer here is probably my favorite as far as a parry game is concerned, simply because of the variety of weapons and stances that you can use. I played almost exclusively katana for my playthrough because, of course I did, but, you know, I want to start playing around with the other weapons as well because it's all just really cool. All the animations, it's just all of it just looks really cool. Hey, this is Trin from the future that's in the middle of editing this. I just realized that being the sweaty combat junkie that I am, I completely forgot to mention that this game actually has difficulty options. Naturally, I played it on the hardest difficulty, but there is an easy and normal difficulty with more lenient parry windows if you want to just press buttons and do cool shit. I never touched those difficulties because I have negative interest in that, but I just thought I should mention that. Between the easier difficulties and the NPC companions you can take into missions, this is substantially easier to get into than the other games in this genre. Finally, let's talk about the New Game Plus, Midnight difficulty. Right off the bat, if you play this game on anything other than Twilight, which is the hardest available difficulty from the get-go, I wouldn't even bother looking at Midnight because this is designed to be a bit harder than even Twilight. You will get your ass beat insanely hard if you jump from easy or normal all the way to this, and there's no way to adjust the difficulty. However, frankly, you're not really missing much, because Midnight difficulty is literally just redoing the missions and re-clearing enemy camps. The main differences are that, actual named bosses will be hanging out in these enemy camps. You'll also gain access to the 5th skill tree that's mostly just stat bonuses and some extra combat styles, and you will have access to the highest tier of gear that allows for full tweaking of bonuses. That's pretty much it. As far as New Game Pluses are concerned, this is easily their most lackluster one in any of their games, to be honest. There's nowhere near as much replayability here, so it's really only here for people like me who just really like the combat and want a bit more to do. This game also hasn't really gotten any DLC since launch, which is where Team Ninja's other games had their endgames fleshed out, so this is literally just the game as it was at launch. Unfortunately, it's looking very unlikely that this game will ever get DLC, so as of this writing, this is it. I would have loved to see this game get even one expansion DLC like Shadow of the Erdtree or something, but it just doesn't seem likely since they're already gearing up and promoting the next Ninja Gaiden. So we'll probably just have to settle for this. Though I want to make it clear, there's still at least like 80 to 100 hours of playtime that you can get out of this if you enjoy it. And of course, you can just keep playing it even beyond that 100-hour mark if you really like it. And for a game that's only going for $50 full price, that's not bad at all. So yeah, overall, do I recommend Rise of the Ronin? It depends on what you want out of it. If you were hoping for a good story and deep RPG systems, then probably not. But if you're just a combat junkie like me and you just want some good fucking sword fighting samurai combat, then absolutely. After some more performance patches come through though. Maybe pick it up on sale in a year's time after they finish patching the game if you're still on the fence. As for me, I love this game. I plan to keep playing it here and there for a while, but as I mentioned at the start, I don't expect most people to like this game as much as I did. It's a shame it keeps drawing comparisons to games like Ghost of Tsushima and Assassin's Creed because I don't think this game was ever even trying to go for that kind of AAA experience, so comparing it to those games just because they're all samurai games is kinda silly. This is a game that is mostly carried by its combat first and foremost. If you ever play this game, it will be because of that. Not the visuals, not the story, the combat. And on that front, I think Rise of the Ronin did a great job. And as I said, it might be my favorite parry-focused combat I've played. I'd love to be surprised one day and see that the game is getting a big DLC expansion, but I think that's kinda in the same boat as still hoping we'll get a No Game No Life Season 2. Anyway, that's about all I have to say about this game, so thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like, comment, subscribe, you know the drill, especially with this being a new channel. Also, I've been streaming over on Twitch pretty much every evening, Monday to Friday, so be sure to drop a follow over there as well. My PC can't stream this game, but I've been streaming my raid nights, Wuthering Waves, and at some point, hopefully this week, I'll finally be starting up my Lies of P playthrough. So yeah, once again, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.